sometimes self-compassion, the yang form, is motivating you to reach your goals, but it's because you care about yourself, not because you're afraid you're going to be worthless if you fail. So if you motivate yourself out of care, what happens is you still strive for the same high standards, but when you don't meet those standards, sorry, I put my research slide here. When you don't meet those standards, you're still okay. You still accept yourself. It's not the end of the world if you fail. You realize you're only human. And what that means is you're more able to pick yourself up and try again. You're less afraid of failure. You're less debilitated by performance anxiety. And there's lots and lots of research that shows now that self-compassion is a better motivator than self-criticism. Another one that comes up is the belief that self-compassion is selfish. I have to admit, sometimes I get this even from my Buddhist colleagues, because the word self is in self-compassion. Aren't we supposed to be focused on others? Isn't the problem that we're too self-centered? And I'm sure some of some of the people at the summit are thinking this, right? Isn't the problem that we're too self-centered? Ironically, self-compassion lessens the sense of separate self. The word is self there just kind of as a pointer. You could easily just say inner compassion as opposed to outer compassion. But if you think about it, shame, self-criticism, those are incredibly self-focused states. It's about, what did I do wrong? Self-compassion just means, hey, I'm a human being. We're all human. It's actually less self-focused. It's just saying, we're actually, really seeing ourselves in the context of the larger humanity. And therefore, the research shows that it leads to less self-focused behavior. For instance, in relationships, people in relationships who have self-compassionate partners describe their partners as being more caring, more giving, more loving, less controlling. They're happier in relationships with self-compassionate partners. It also leads to things like more forgiveness and more perspective taking. So again, it's a little bit of a shame that the word self is in self-compassion, but it kind of, I needed it to contrast it with self-esteem. But self-compassion lessens the sense of separate self. And then finally, just to finish up my quick research overview, in terms of what does the research say about the difference between self-esteem and self-compassion? Well, like I said, they're both linked to positive well-being, but the sense of self-worth with self-compassion is not contingent. You don't have to succeed to have self-compassion. It's there for you when you succeed, but also when you fail, right? So when you fail, it still is there to catch you when you fall. And so because it's less contingent, it means the sense of self-worth that comes from self-compassion is much more stable over time. We actually did one study where over 8 months, we measured people's state self-worth, how they're feeling in the moment, 12 times over 8 months. And the sense of self-worth linked to self-compassion was much more stable because, again, it's there for you when you're up and when you're down, whereas self-esteem is more up and down like this. With self-compassion, it's not linked to social comparison the way self-esteem is. You don't have to be special and above average to have self-compassion. You don't have to be better than anyone to have self-compassion. You just have to be a flawed human being like everyone else. I can do that. That's a box I can check, right? So it kind of, what that means is it's linked to more social connectedness, right? And then finally, kind of to close this out to the theme of this conference, it's not linked to narcissism at all. Now, some people may be wondering, why isn't it negatively linked to narcissism? That's because people with low self-compassion, that would have to mean that people with low self-compassion were narcissistic. So it's basically they're totally unrelated. How much self-compassion you have has nothing to do with narcissism, whereas unfortunately how much self-esteem you have has quite a lot to do with narcissism. There's a very robust link between self-esteem and narcissism, because a lot of people who have high self-esteem, not everyone of course, but a lot of people get their high self-esteem from being narcissistic. So so I just really think that that's why I've devoted my life to self-compassion. You can see I'm really excited about the ideas. It's just such a useful tool to have.
It's both useful, but it's also profoundly transformative. Like you, I have done many years of practice, and this was something that I didn't gain in years of psychotherapy as a patient, or as studying it in graduate school, or as performing it for other folks as a therapist. that there's really something very powerful about this practice. A couple of questions I wanted to see if we could go a little bit deeper on is this, first of all, this whole contrast between self-esteem and self-compassion, I think is really one that needs more traction in our popular press, just because I think people confound the two, or people think the only deal in town is self-esteem.
Mm-hmm.
It sounds like, if I could simplify it, like from self-esteem, we operate out of fear, and from self-compassion, we operate more from love.
Yeah.
They seem like they're really two different operating systems in effect.
Right.
Would you agree with that? That it's
Yeah. Well, I mean, I should say self-esteem is not a bad thing, right? You can have healthy, unconditional sources of self-esteem. And so it's not like self-esteem is always from fear. When children have secure attachment and they're loved by their parents, they'll also have high self-esteem. But when the kind of more narcissistic type of self-esteem, the fragile self-esteem, the self-esteem that comes from needing to be better than others, or superior to others, that type of self-esteem definitely comes from fear. It's like fear that I'm not good enough, and therefore I need to puff myself up, or I need constant adulation so that I don't have to face this fear that maybe I'm unworthy, right? Whereas self-compassion, well, and we actually know this physiologically, self-compassion is rooted in the care system, right? So self-criticism is rooted in the threat defense system. Like literally, it's a way to make us feel safe by beating ourselves up. We think we're going to protect ourselves from harm. Whereas self-compassion is rooted in the care system when it comes from feeling connected and close to others, including
right.
oneself.